It's all fun and games until the habit gets the better of young players. Join me for a deep dive into the video game addiction.
From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Yuan.
Hello there, and a very warm welcome to The Hub. I'm Wang Yuan. What will it take to deal with video game addiction? That is a tough nut to crack for parents, for schools, and for societies. Here in China, a new, tougher approach has been introduced to hopefully get young kids get a handle on their habit. An approach not without its controversies. Why are kids obsessed with online gaming? It is a million-dollar question for parents who worry their kids may waste their golden days on the fun but addictive distraction. Setting limits seems to be a good idea, but it doesn't always work.
Well, I do think that there needs to be some kind of awareness for the issue of video game addiction and really wasting a lot of time.
On August 30th, China's National Press and Publication Administration released an advisory on helping minors curb addiction to online games. People under 18 are only allowed to play video games from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. on Fridays, weekends, or public holidays. But where there is a will, there is a way. Young gamers, driven by their oppressed thirst for more playtime, got creative in circumventing the regulations. Amid the campaign against game addiction, China moves ahead with key legislation on privacy protection. On November the 1st, the Personal Information Protection Law is put into practice, and minors are prioritized in the legislation. Any personal information request for the under 14s will require parental approval. Game companies may only collect and store limited information under strict state regulation and supervision. Now let's step back and ask ourselves, is online gaming really that harmful for kids? In China, 63% of minors habitually play video games. In America, it's a similar story.
Well, according to a recent study in this country, the average American kid plays video games for more than 15 hours a week. A poll from the University of Michigan found that 86% of parents believe their children spent too much time playing video games. Apparently, the other 14% weren't paying attention. So it's a legitimate problem.
More time online usually means less time for schoolwork, sports, and real-life contact with people. A study from the Rutgers University shows that middle school-age children who recreationally use the internet, social media, or video games for more than an hour each day during the school week will significantly lower grades and test scores. And doctors warn that there are far worse consequences than lowered test scores.
We've recently talked with parents of 152 kids who are seriously addicted to online games. These kids suffer from gastrointestinal diseases, myopia, neck and spine injuries. It is time to regulate underage gaming.
Many have welcomed the new rules to rein in gaming addiction.
As a parent, I really support the government's restrictions on the children's gaming time.
We all need a bit of fun in our lives, minors included. But how much is too much? Profit-driven as gaming companies are, what should they do to make sure their products are socially responsible too? And there is this age-old debate. By limiting the playtime for young kids, is the government interfering in people's personal freedoms? Or is freedom an overrated word, and it's high time we had more enlightened views about what freedom is and is not about? For more on this, we're joined in Beijing by Dr. Wang Yuan, Associate Research Fellow from Beijing Foreign Studies University, and also by Dr. Lembke, Professor of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. Welcome to both of you. Welcome to CGTN, to The Hub. Let me go to you first, Professor Lembke. Under the new rule, Chinese minors are only allowed to play online games for no more than 1 hour each day on Fridays or weekends. Scientifically, do you see any merit of setting such limits? Do you think it will work?
Well, I think there's a lot of merit in setting these limits. We do know that young people and older people alike are spending too much time playing video games, and that is not good for mental and physical health. There's good brain science to support that. So I do think that the idea behind it is a good one, and I think that my guess is that parents across China are rejoicing for the help that they're getting, because expecting parents to police this on their own is just a losing battle. Whether or not it will actually work, whether or not it will be feasible, whether or not kids will figure out how to circumvent the restrictions, I think that remains to be seen.
Yeah, talking about circumventing rules, when we were in school, our favorite mantra is, wherever there's oppression, there is rebellion. So there have been a whole lot of ways for these kids in getting creative of circumventing these rules. Dr. Wang Yuan, what do you think of such policies? Do you think it is feasible?
Well, I think it is feasible to a great extent because the purpose actually is in line with the overall education goal, that is to foster citizens with the moral, physical, intellectual, and aesthetical foundation, and also with a hard-working spirit as expressed in our education guidelines, and also the core competences for Chinese students as specified in our policy have three key dimensions. The first is the intellectual foundation, the second is the self-development, and then social participation. According to the empirical findings, if we want students to develop those qualities such as self-discipline that are central to their integrity and moral development, then the most effective way is to create a disciplined environment. That's exactly what this policy is intended for. So by setting the rule or limiting the timing and duration of video games, the students will have a disciplined environment, and also this creates kind of culture that can help students to discipline themselves so that they can engage in more effective learning. That will be good for their physical development and
Yeah. I agree with you. You know, Dr. Wang, I totally agree with you. In the perfect world, we all want our kids to focus on arguably the more important things, that is school and sports and people-to-people contact. How do American parents, American gaming companies and their government been dealing with this issue? Because I suppose gaming addiction is also a big problem in the United States.
Yes, it is. It's a big and growing problem, especially among young men. And we're really at the very beginnings as a society of discussing this problem and trying to figure out solutions. What China has done, imposing limits, from the government down, is something that could never happen here in the United States. We just don't have that kind of social system. But people are beginning to talk about and think about what we can do to help parents and to help people limit their consumption, because it's very clear that we also have this problem. And I do think that these types of restrictions will help people limit their use if they're not yet addicted. But for individuals who already are addicted to video games, and also just people who, I imagine young people in China who just want to go against authority, it will be very exciting for them, to figure out ways around this. So I suspect that, just getting back to your original question of whether or not this is going to work in China, I suspect that for a proportion of the population, it will be an effective restraint. But for those who are already addicted, or for those, who have lost their own self-control, and for those who just kind of want to go against regulations because it's exciting to do that when you're young, it probably will not make the difference.
Right. You wrote an article on the Wall Street Journal saying that, basically you're asking your patients to give up video games for a month. Do you think such intervention of cutting off access to digital gadgets, to game services, could be an effective one?
Yes, I do. So I often see young people who come in to see me or are brought in by their parents because of depression and anxiety. And they usually want me to prescribe a medication for them or do psychotherapy. But often the very first intervention that I'll do is to tell them to not be on their screens for 1 month. And why do I do that? It's because when we're doing gaming online and other entertainment online, it releases a lot of dopamine, our brain's pleasure neurotransmitter, in the brain's reward pathway. And in order to compensate or adapt to those high levels of dopamine, what our brain does is it downregulates our own dopamine production. So we essentially go into a dopamine deficit state where when we're not playing video games, our dopamine levels are not at baseline, they're in fact below baseline. And we're then experiencing the universal symptoms of withdrawal from any addictive substance, which is anxiety, irritability, depression, and intrusive thoughts of wanting to use that drug, or in this case, play video games. So the key here is that it's the video games themselves that are creating the depression and anxiety, not the other way around. And so the key intervention is to stop playing games long enough for our own endogenous dopamine to regenerate itself, to bring levels back up to baseline, so that we're not constantly thinking about playing games, and we can also enjoy other natural rewards.
Dr. Wang, let me go back to you. We know that exercising, taking up a sport in China has been advocated nationwide by the president, by education policymakers. How would you relate China's educational policy shift with this regulation on reducing gaming addiction?
Well, actually, this regulation works together with another recent policy that prioritizes the health education. Well, that policy also mandates the schools to provide more physical education, including the 20 minutes physical exercises before the first class starts, and also the mandatory 1 hour physical exercises for all the students in primary and secondary schools. So this emphasis on the physical education or on sports and exercises actually is consistent with the regulation on the restriction of the video games, because both will encourage the students to engage in more hands-on activities such as physical activities and also the other activities.
All right. So back to this issue of online gaming. I know that you're also sitting in the National Institute of Education Policy. So looking at this issue worldwide, how are other countries been dealing with this problem of gaming addiction?
This addiction to video games is indeed a universal problem that has prevailed in many countries. Well, behind a great variety of policies taken by the governments around the world, I think there is the common consensus. The first is the video games are detrimental to students' mental and physical well-being. And then the second is for the effective invitation is related to creation of a disciplined environment that's underpinned by the assumption that the addiction will spontaneously dissolve if there is a radical change in the environment, such as such kind of restrictions on the use of video games, just as this Chinese government policy that has just been issued. And also another thing is to create a culture, the culture that would first is enable everybody to be aware that the reduced time on the video games is something, a normal behavior among the teenagers, because otherwise the teenagers might indulge themselves in the video games and they can earn extra points and get sense of self-achievements, and also even compete among the peer students and get self-esteem through the video games. So if such limitation really works, and then this will lead to a kind of culture that everybody will spend less time on video games and engage in alternative activities such as sports and also learning, etc.
Talking about indulgence, Dr. Lembke, you explained in your book, Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence, that relentless pursuit of pleasure leads, there you go, that's your book, Dopamine Nation. In the book, you argued that relentless pursuit of pleasure leads to pain. Explain to us, what do you mean?
Well, so it's paradoxical, because in the moment when we're doing these feel-good activities like playing video games or being on social media or shopping or eating sugary foods, it feels good and it releases our pleasure neurotransmitter dopamine in the brain's reward pathway. But what the brain does almost immediately to respond to that increased level of dopamine is to downregulate production of our own dopamine receptors and our own dopamine transmission, so that we go not just to baseline levels, but actually below baseline levels. And this is what we experience as pain in many different forms. So one of the things I often say to my patients who have become addicted to video games or YouTube or social media, I ask them to really pay attention to not just how they're feeling when they're playing, but how they're feeling in that moment when they know they have to get off. That feeling of sort of falling away, anxiety, restlessness, that desire to keep playing. That is really our dopamine levels in our brain coming not just back down, but actually plummeting even further. And that's what creates this anxiety, this restlessness, and the urges to keep playing. And I think understanding the neuroscience frame of that can really help people be sort of mindful about getting addicted and realizing why they're so preoccupied with playing more or being online more. And the solution to that really is to take a period of time away from that online activity, enough for dopamine levels to come back up to baseline so that we kind of restore our healthy, normal joy levels again.
People are, the young kids are coming to a point where, playing a lot of computer games, online games is too much. But who should give them the push? Do you think it should be the government or the parents or the schools? What is the situation in the United States?
Well, in the United States, what you have is an enormous sense of desperation among parents. Parents in the United States are pulling out their hair, wondering how to get their kids off of their devices. And it's not just about video games here in the United States. It's about watching YouTube. It's about social media. It's about all of the things that people do online, especially young people. And it's very, very difficult. There's now a huge national discussion about who should be setting limits. And what I can tell you is that it is not fair to leave it just up to the individual, although they have a responsibility, but especially not just up to children, who I think have less responsibility than adults do. And parents alone cannot solve this problem. So we do need not just the bottom-up approach, but also the top-down approach. I do think that schools have a responsibility to make sure that there are device-free and tech-free spaces for kids to learn. I do think corporations have a responsibility, although how to incentivize them to make changes to their apps and to make restrictions and to help parents is very difficult. And in this country, usually it would be either through financial incentives or disincentives, because that's how our society works. And I do think the government is beginning to think about what to do about this problem. For example, there are now hearings in our Congress about social media apps like Instagram. Instagram just said they were going to come out with a social media app directed specifically for children, and they've put a halt on that because there were so many parents and professionals and elected officials who said that's a terrible idea to make an Instagram just for kids. Now, I think Facebook's idea was that, well, they would make it more restrictive or they would make it safer. But I think it's clear that we don't yet have the technology to really make something safe. And furthermore, when you're making a social media app that's directed at kids, you're sending the message culturally that it's okay for kids to be on those online activities. And for kids under a certain age, it probably isn't healthy or good for them. But I guess one thing I would ask my Chinese colleague is, I'm fascinated at the focus that the Chinese government has on video games. So video games are certainly addictive, but so is social media, so is YouTube, so are many things that people do online. Why is it that the Chinese government has focused just on video games?
Dr. Wang, seems like a question has been posed to you.
Oh, well, I could assume that the assumption behind such policy is the video games is regarded as the most detrimental to the students' health in comparison with such things as TikTok in the United States and the Douyin in China. The students or kids, they could still learn a great variety of knowledge through watching the video clips from either TikTok or Douyin or such social media platform. And also they could also try to learn to create their own video clips. So this is the real difference between two types of activities. In the case of really creating video clips, that involves the authentic learning that students will to apply what they have learned and also to discover new things and then to create something different from others. Well, by video games, it's much more passive activities. They just situate themselves in a virtual world that has been created by somebody else. And then in that kind of activities, there is the lacking of the most essential things of education, such as critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. So that's why I think the Chinese government had prioritized the reduction or limitation of video games instead of other social media platform or related activities.
I can already hear a lot of kids arguing that playing computer games, online games, can be good for critical thinking. We think about all the role-playing games, strategies. You know what? Thank you both so very much. Dr. Anna Lembke, professor at Stanford University. Also, Dr. Wang Yuan with Beijing Foreign Studies University. You're watching The Hub with me, Wang Guan. We'll be right back after the break.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back at The Hub. We are discussing China's new regulations limiting online gaming for people under the age of 18. In fact, adults in other countries face the similar dilemma. how much entertainment time should they allow their kids before it develops into an addiction? 美国老张, an English teacher in China, posted a video on the Chinese social media platform Weibo with his observations of how some parents in the U.S. reacted to the Chinese notice. Watch.
Obviously, parents are afraid of kids becoming antisocial or violent or not having enough exercise if all they do is play video games. However, studies have also shown that kids who play games that are strategic or that have role-playing actually learn how to think better and more creatively, and they do better in school. So there's both sides. The thing is, it's a $40 billion a year industry here in the United States, so it has a lot of power and it's in everybody's hands. So the top 4 video games right now in the United States are Call of Duty Warzone, Minecraft, Animal Crossing New Horizon, and Grand Theft Auto 5. Now here's a look at my first video game. You can see why I never spent so much time on it. All right, game's down, go outside, play in the sun. I'm Lao Jiang.
Man, that's certainly reminiscent of my childhood years playing those computer games, those, Nintendo games. Gaming in Lao Jiang's era has apparently evolved. The gadgets are getting smarter, so are the plots of the games themselves. As Lao Jiang also mentioned, teenagers engaging in online games might not always be bad. With moderate use, one's ability in critical thinking and teamwork could also get trained. That is also what a teenager in his TED Talk argued. Listen.
Through playing this game, I have learned and developed many skills and even matured. Some of these skills include socialization, cooperation, and communication. As a homeschooler, playing this game brings me closer to getting the socialization other kids get in their 6-hour school day. Each time I log on, I hope to see my friend, another homeschooler who lives in North Carolina. Each time we see each other online, we join up, play together, and have some genuine fun. It's like having a pen pal, only a lot more interactive.
We thought it's important to hear from a teenager, a young man. After all, who do we, the adults, think we are if we claim to know everything? And that will do it for this edition of The Hub. If you have any suggestions, comments, or questions about today's pick or our show, feel free to contact me on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, Weibo, and more. Send us your favorite social media content too, because we might just pick them next time around. Thank you for joining us. I'm Wang Yuan. Our news coverage continues at CGTN. Bye for now.